Hello everyone, this is Caleb Simpson, and you are watching my walkthrough for Chrono Trigger for Nintendo DS. This video covers Dimensional Vortex, which is a final area that is available in the game after you've completed the base game and defeated Lavos. So if you defeat Lavos in whatever manner you want to do that, there's a couple different ways to reach him, but once you defeat him, you'll witness the cinematic of these vortices appearing in various time periods, which we can go to some optional endgame dungeons that lead to a final, even more difficult boss than Lavos. So, that's what's going on. So on screen you're watching, this is after I've defeated Lavos and gotten the main ending for taking the Black Omen route. So I'm going to go ahead and save my game file. What this will do is it will save my progress, and I think it updates my bestiary and stuff like that. I'm not actually sure if it, updates all your consumables and saves all the experience you could have gotten from those final boss battles. I'm not actually sure about that. Regardless, when you open your game file, it will take you back to the last place you used a Sparkly. So, I last saved on the Black Omen before I fought Zeal. Now, at this point, it would probably be faster for me to just go ahead and defeat Zeal again. Otherwise, I can run back, which is what I actually do in this recording, and then go to, the halfway point of the Black Omen to get out of here. Now, otherwise, in general, I think it's faster, just generally speaking, if you defeat Zeal and then fight the first two forms, Attack Mode and Outer Shell of Lavos. Then you'll appear in that cave right before the final battle, and you can use a portal in the bottom left corner to go back to the end of time and save there. So that would overall be better. I'm just mentioning it as an option, just so that you understand what happens after you completed the game in order to start getting towards Dimensional Vortex. So there's a vortex in 3 different time periods, so I'm going to just start at the earlier time period, which is 12,000 BC, and you can do them in any order you want. This is just the one that I'm choosing to start with. This is going to be right next to Surviving Village, and the portal is just to the right, so go ahead and enter. Our characters will comment about how this area is creepy, and then you can either go south to exit, or you can go north in order to enter the vortex itself and actually enter this dungeon. Within each vortex, you have to fight your way through a series of rooms, and the enemies that you face there are the exact same as they were the first time we were in these areas. So one thing that's interesting to note about that is you can charm them for the items that they gave you back then. This doesn't really matter for the most part, although there are some enemies that are in exclusive areas that are one-time events, such as going on the Mountain of Woe, for example. But for the most part, it doesn't really matter. What I'd recommend to get through all these areas is to use a magic damage dealer to kill everything on the screen, and then have 2 physical damage dealers who can either use regular attacks or use physical attacks to take out any guys that are immune to magic. Most enemies are vulnerable to fire in particular, so if you're worried about it, you can always just use Luca. Otherwise, I think Magus is a really good choice because he has a lot of very high resistance to both physical and magical, and he's just easy. And it gives him a chance to get some XP and stuff if he's not maxed yet. But anyways, just use Dark Matter and everything, and then use Fire too otherwise. And then other than that, I would recommend Luca would be the next best person for this slot. Once you've proceeded through enough scenes, you'll then find yourself in a cave where you can go to one side and you can leave the Dimensional Vortex if you want to, otherwise you can save at the other side, and then we're finally ready to actually enter the dungeon itself. Now, each one of the vortexes brings you to, or vortices, brings you to a different area that's totally different. For 12,000 BC, this brings you to a frozen mountain, and I don't think this actually has a name or anything. There's no title in-game for this area. It actually has some unique music here, and I actually really like it a lot. A lot of the enemies that are in these Dimensional Vortex areas are the same ones that we saw in Lost Sanctum, which were all pretty easy in general. As far as there is some new enemies that are here unique to Dimensional Vortex, and as far as this area, the Frozen Mountain, the thing to know is that there's a lot of enemies that will absorb Shadow, and there's one enemy that will absorb Water. So just generally speaking, it's better to focus on either Lightning or Fire, and then everything's great. So if you're strong enough, you can probably just even use Fire too and kill everything on the screen for most of the enemies in this entire area. So I'd recommend you just do that for just about everything. There are some mages later on that are pretty, not necessarily immune, but they are very resistant to magic damage in general, so you're better off using physical. So anyways, what I recommend you do is, for most of these last areas of the game, just a single magic damage dealer of the appropriate element, and then 2 physical damage dealers is generally speaking your best bet. Now on screen you'll actually see that I look at a chest over to the left, but I didn't actually open it. It contains a lapis, so it wasn't really that big a deal. But anyways, open that one if you want to. I wasn't really worried about it. The Mega Elixir that I got earlier was much more worthwhile. So continuing on, I'm just going to ignore all the enemies that I can, and continuing on towards the top of the mountain. Now in this next area there is some skeletons. These guys will absorb Shadow, so you want to use something other than that. Generally speaking, most enemies don't have immunities to fire, so I'm going to be using Fire for most of these areas because it's just a little bit easier. Magus is a great choice for this, otherwise Luca would be really solid for all this as well. Now back in the Lost Sanctum video, I was talking about a rare enemy called a Wonder Rock. Now you can get them in either the Lost Sanctum or in Dimensional Vortex in all of the areas. There's a couple different places where you can find them, but they're super rare, they don't appear very often. In my experience, and also seems like the consensus is online, that the easiest place to find them is here in Dimensional Vortex in this location right here. So I'm going to go to a specific point select. I'm going to run in circles with my characters. That is the point where the Wonder Rock spawns, and you just want to keep leaving the screen and coming back over and over again to make it see if it'll appear. Now, in general, for this slide, you might come up here repeatedly because you're trying all the various caves up ahead, and so as a result, you might come to this location repeatedly anyways, so you might just end up encountering a Wonder Rock, but just be prepared for it, and I'll skip ahead later into the video if you want to see how to defeat that, but I will be showing that later on in this video. So, just pointing out real quick before we move on, just keep an eye out for a Wonder Rock. Now in this next area on the slide, you can then stop yourself from sliding by holding up on the D-pad. This will allow you to run against the sliding. It's almost like we're being blown down with wind or something like that. Very easy to navigate though. What I'm doing is I'm just exploring all the areas on my map just so I can uncover everything. But just so that my map is nice and revealed. But it doesn't really matter. Basically, all you really need to know is the top left and top right one actually lead to the items. Otherwise, everything else leads back to the beginning is all you really need to know about this area. Anyway, all of the lower caves lead back to the previous screen. You'll appear back at one of the lower caves. You want to work your way back up the mountain. You want to use fire on the skeletons again, and then keep an eye out for the Wonder Rock here, and then just go back down the slide. Now here I'm going to hold up on the D-pad to keep from sliding down too bad, and then go to the top left cave, which leads to some of the items. You can ignore the enemies here, just know that the mages are more susceptible to physical specifically, but otherwise just use an element other than shadow. The nearby chest here contains a Shadow Plume robe, which is one of the best chest pieces in the game for Magus exclusively. This has very high physical defense, and it also has auto barrier, which is sweet, which will reduce incoming magic damage by 1/3. It also has 20 magic defense, which is really silly, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Continuing on towards the right, again, you can ignore these enemies. There is a nearby chest, and otherwise, for all of these upper caves, if you go through them, it'll lead to this area, and all you have to do to continue onwards is go to the far bottom right. I'm exploring my mini-map as long as I'm here. But if you go to the far bottom right, you can continue on going one screen to the right. Otherwise, if you want to go back at the mountain, all you have to do is take the nearby stone ladder thing and then go over to the left, which will slide you back down to towards the top of the mountain, actually, which is kind of weird. It actually, I think it even makes us go up in elevation, which I'm not really sure how that works. Anyways, again, climb the mountain. You want to destroy these skeletons and then check for the Wonder Rock again as long as we're here. So continuing my Shadow Plume robe rant. So Magus has this item, but it's kind of silly that it gives 20 magic defense, which is huge. That's the most magic defense out of any item in the entire game. But Magus is the last person who needs it because magic defense is actually the stat that he's going to max out first over all the characters. He has the highest magic defense in the game, just generally speaking. So giving him 20 magic defense is silly because he caps out at 99 at level 53. And then, yeah, the lowest level you could be, where it would actually give you a benefit, would be level 42. But because you like, at 42, you can barely take Lavos, and that's with correct item choice so that you have high magic defense. It's just kind of silly. It's like too late at this point for it to be any useful at all. So as far as that particular stat, I would much rather get some stamina or strength on that item because that's actually stuff he's going to need that we're trying to cap out on him. I don't know. Magic defense is just such a weird choice. Continuing on with gameplay, if you want to take the slide and go to the top right cave instead, this will lead to a new area. Now, before you continue on, you want to go left to screen. I know it doesn't look like you can do that, but you totally can here. This will lead to a cave where there's a bunch of little hidden wall areas that you can walk through that will lead to chests that contain goodies. Now, if you went to the Lost Sanctum with me, then this should all look very familiar to you because these are scenes from that particular area, and these chests are all in the same location. So open them all. The one that's worth pointing out is the Venus Bow, which is a really good item for Marl. This item is super interesting because what it does is it always does 777 damage, which is either really good or really bad depending on the situation. So it provides some interesting utility for her because Marl is strictly a support caster, and then otherwise she's a magic damage dealer, and lastly she does physical damage. If you're going to be doing physical damage, you want physical damage, somebody else is better. However, the interesting thing to know about this is because it always does 777 damage, that means you can cut through physical defenses. So if you're fighting a boss, for example, that has really high physical defense for a particular phase, and so normally your regular attacks and physical attacks will only do like, say, 19 damage or something, then Marl can just cut through that entirely. She bypasses all the physical defenses, and she does damage guaranteed. So it's a very easy way to guarantee you're steadily whittling down a boss, and it gives her an option in a time when she would normally wait. Like, for example, Black Tyranno. You know how it has that phase where it's getting ready to start counting down, but it's not quite at that point yet? She can attack during its high defense phase and start whittling it down while everybody else is waiting. So that's just an interesting thing to know. I think this is pretty neat. It just fleshes out her kit and gives her like a little bit of utility that other characters just don't have, so it makes her attack actually useful as opposed to just ignoring it because it's totally worthless. As a quick comment though, if you give her enough accuracy, eventually the Valkyrie bow, just generally speaking for most regular combat, becomes useful again, but it takes a long time for her to get enough accuracy for that to actually be worth it. You basically have to just level up a whole ton, get tons of XP. Speaking of unnecessary XP, what I'm doing right now is I am running around in circles here on top of the mountain to try and get a Wonder Rock to appear. So all I'm doing is I'm taking the top cave and then working my way to the top of the mountain, killing the skeletons again, and then checking off to the right to see if there's a Wonder Rock. Now, in my experience, this is the best place to farm for them in the entire game. These enemies are only found in Lost Sanctum as well as Dimensional Vortex, and I think there's just like one area in all those places that you can find them, or like a couple different places in each one of those zones where you can find them, but it's a very low chance, and I don't actually know what that percent chance is, but here I think it's a little bit higher chance, but also the fact there's only one mandatory combat. A lot of the other areas you have to fight through like 4 or 5 combats just to get to where the Wonder Rock is, so I think this is overall the most efficient because you can do it very quickly. You can run through here in like 30 seconds, you can check for another Wonder Rock. So if you keep going here, I tried like 8 times, and then I found it right away. So this is the most tried and true place to get them in the entire game, in particular just because it's so fast. You can check through here like every 30 seconds and then just try several times, and I think the spawn chance is way higher too, so you have a much higher chance of finding them here than anywhere else in the entire game. Super easy. So this is, I would highly, highly recommend if you're looking for a Wonder Rock to get them here. It doesn't take very long at all. So you should get it after not too many tries. I think it's like a 1 out of 20 chance, or maybe it's even more than that, 1 out of 10 chance. It's not too bad actually compared to other places. So anyways, as far as Wonder Rocks go, they have 3 attacks. One of them is an Earthquake ability, which doesn't really hurt that bad, whatever. Then it has, unlike Rubble have Omni-Lock that they use at the beginning of combat. This guy does not have that. Instead, it has just a regular lock ability that applies to one character. However, so it does it to somebody random. However, I think that will get through your status immunity anyways, and so that bypasses it just like Omni-Lock does. This is the only enemy in the game that does that, which is super annoying. Now what Lock does is it will make it so you're unable to use techs and items, which is a real big pain. And then the last ability it has is Escape, which will make it just flee combat entirely. So, what you want for this enemy is you want to wear haste items. So wear like either haste helms or the Angel's Tiara, either one of those two. Ideally have status protection. I think it bypasses status protection anyways. Regardless, you want to attack it as soon as possible, and you can either try and kill it, and by just using your hardest hitting techs you have to try and kill it to get the Lumicite Shard, hopefully before it runs away, or you want to charm it as soon as possible. Now this is probably a more tried and true method. You know, again, we have a couple awkward things, is that you have a 1 out of 3 chance of it using the lock ability, and there's a 1 out of 3 chance of it doing it to Ayla. So there's, I guess, out of 9. I guess there's a 1 out of 9 chance for it to lock out Ayla so she's unable to charm. So, that's not too bad odds, but there's a 1 out of 3 chance that it will just escape right away anyways, which is also really bad. So anyways, what you want to do is ideally you bring Ayla and Marl to try and charm it as soon as possible. This gives you the highest chance of guaranteeing that you get a Lumicite Shard. Now, there's a chance that it could fail, and if that happens, just run around again and keep trying. And then if it does go ahead and lock Ayla, then just go ahead, just check and see if it works. But it might, I don't know, I think it bypasses it. My memory might be wrong on this. Regardless, then if you can't charm it, then just go ahead and kill it as soon as possible. And just use the hardest hitting, highest MP cost spells you have. Just hit it as hard as you possibly can. So that all being said, with the chance for it to run away, as well as the chance for it to lock Ayla that bypasses immunity, I think that basically means you have a 44.4 chance for it to fail. So if that happens, then, at least initially, then just run away. In my experience, I usually think it's fine. I don't know why. The ones in Lost Sanctum, they tend to run away instantly, and then these ones tend to stick around and fight, so I don't know why that is. Maybe it just happened to work out that way for me, but it seems like this one's always fine for me, and I can always get it right away. So, if that does happen and it runs away, then just run around and try again. I find taking the slide is a little bit easier overall, but whatever you want to do there, you can totally just take the left and then go down a screen and then come back up again and try to make it spawn once more. Whatever you want to do is not that big a deal. Now, in order to continue onwards, once you have the Lumicite Shard optionally in hand, you want to take the top right cave, would be the one I'd recommend on the slide, and then work your way to the far bottom right corner of the screen. This will lead on to the next area. This next area is a snowfield that has a couple new enemies that we haven't really seen yet, and there's also a bunch of snow berms that are kind of blocking our path. I'm going to go explore all around the edges so that you can see it on my minimap, just so that my map is fully explored. The one thing worth noting is that there is some capsules kind of towards the middle. There's a strength, speed, and magic capsule at different corners, so we're just going to work our way towards each one of those and grab those. Those are kind of like the little hidden goodies, but otherwise make sure you open all the chests because they have some really valuable things. Now, as far as enemies here, there is some snow beasts. Those guys have tons of life, and they will absorb water magic, so you want to use something else. They are actually weak to magic, just use any other kind of magic attack other than water, and then you can get through them just fine. Otherwise, there are some Chaos Mages. These guys will absorb Shadow, and they are also fairly resistant to magic, so you're better off just using regular physical attacks if you can. Now, the most notable thing in this entire area is kind of in the middle of the zone off to the far bottom right, there's going to be a chest that contains the Regal Gown, which is a female-only chest piece that has like slightly less armor than the prismatic dress, but it also gives auto barrier and auto protect, which means that it will block incoming magical and physical damage by 1/3, which is great. That makes it one of the best chest pieces in the entire game. Super, super good. I'd highly recommend you put this on Marl, and part of the reason for this is because she's our healer. She tends to have less stamina than some of the other characters, so it's just a really good thing to give her the protect status. And then meanwhile, Luca is going to be wearing the elemental Aegis anyways, which I will be getting later on in this video. So that all being said, who should have which chest pieces? So basically what I'd do is I would put Ayla should have the prismatic dress, and then Marl should have the regal gown, and finally Luca should have the elemental Aegis once we have unlocked that. So anyways, that would be what I'd recommend for like end game items. Unless you've already played through the game multiple times on New Game Plus, then you could potentially have 2 Regal Gowns and put one of those on Ayla as well. But yeah, even though the Regal Gown has less armor than the Prismatic Dress does, because it has the Protect status, it's still just better overall. Unless you're going to be applying that in the middle of battle. Like I explained this back in a Lavos fight, like if you are going to be using the Barrier Sphere and Shield Sphere, then you don't necessarily need those automatically on your chest piece because you're going to be applying them in the middle of combat anyway, so just higher armor or higher magic defense would be better overall, assuming that those stats aren't capped anyways. In this next area, there's some snow beasts, and I forgot that they will absorb water, but yeah, just if you use any water abilities, they will just absorb it like crazy, and it heals them for way more. I don't know, it feels like they absorb a higher percentage of the water damage compared to other enemies. A lot of enemies that absorb elemental damage, it doesn't heal them quite this extreme, because I'm sure I'm not doing that much damage with Iceberg Toss anyway. Regardless, it's just extreme. One of the other things I don't understand about this game that I was going back to our discussion about the armor pieces is I feel like having the Prismatic Dress or just any kind of item that gives the barrier buff to Ayla is the most important thing, because she takes increased damage from magic, even though like at this point I'm at the end of the game and I'm starting to max out my stats, and both Marl and Ayla have 99 magic defense. They're already capped out. And yet, Ayla still takes double the damage or even triple the magic damage that Marl does, and I don't understand why. It's almost like there's some other like hidden under the hood mechanics that I'm not aware of or something like that. It just feels like stat-wise it would make sense for them both to have the same amount of defenses, or maybe even though it says star or whatever, that it's actually still going up even though it doesn't show it or something. I don't understand. Whatever. So once you've completed the Frozen Mountain, you'll find yourself in Twilight Grotto. You want to go ahead and use the Sparkly to save and use shelters, and then there's a nearby whirlpool thing that you can use to leave Dimensional Vortex if you want. I'd recommend you don't do that, obviously, and then continue on towards the far north. Now what you'll find is that there is a little cinematic in which Marl will actually walk forward, and she'll actually just appear out of nowhere if she's not in your party. She'll just pop up next to your other characters, so you actually have 4 people in the same time period temporarily. Gasp, that's against the rules, you're not supposed to do that. Anyways, this will then make you choose your party, and Marl is stuck in slot for this next boss battle. So, as far as other characters you can bring, the thing to know is that this boss is immune to water, but meanwhile it is highly vulnerable to shadow and fire. So what I recommend you do is have Luca, and then for your last slot you can either have Magus for dark matter, you can have Kronos, you can have the triple tech called Final Kick, I believe it's called. Otherwise you can have Ayla, and Ayla's a great person because she can use Inferno with Luca, and she can also do some pretty good single target physical as well, but this also gives us the opportunity to charm, and you can charm a haste helm off this boss as well. I love haste though, it's just so good. So, moving on. This boss, go ahead and charm it as soon as possible, but otherwise, as far as things to know, its attacks honestly aren't that bad. It has Barrage and Icefall, both of which are not too bad. One is single target, the other one will hit the whole party, and each one of them, like worst case scenario, will hit you for like 300. I think if you're like in the 42 range, it might hit for as high as like 500 maybe, but I still don't think it's really that big a deal. If you have one character using Lapis or using like Star Cure or something like that, you're fine. So I think Marl by herself can take care of all the healing, no problem. So meanwhile, your other 2 characters, you just want to make sure that it's a team composition that can use some kind of dual tech that can do good damage. The problem with this boss actually is just the fact that it heals so much, so it's just a war of attrition. We're trying to see who can outlast the other person, or that, yeah. We need to do enough damage to kill this boss before she just heals up. So, as long as you're doing like over 2,000 plus damage per turn, you should easily be able to defeat her, and that's all you really need to know. Just heal every once in a while if you need to, but otherwise, just have everybody pool together the resources and do as much damage. Now, in my particular case, I'm using Inferno with Ayla and Luca. However, I could also use Antipode Bomb 3 if I wasn't healing with Marl. You can also optionally reduce the damage further by wearing mermaid helms, or even better, blue plate, because that would make him heal you instead. Because at that point, then the only thing you have to worry about is just Barrage. Now, unfortunately, she does tend to use Barrage repeatedly on the same character, so she'll pick somebody and Barrage them 2 times in a row, which can be upwards of like 600, 700 damage, but as long as Marl is healing with Star Cure, you should easily be able to counter that no problem, and it's not really that big a deal. One of the things I think is strange about all these shade fights is the fact that the names are different. Like, I don't understand why we can't just call Icefall Ice 2. I mean, I realize, though, that she has like a 50% chance to counter, and she'll use one of those abilities, either one of those things. So that does happen. However, I don't understand why we couldn't have something a little bit... Like for example, if they're trying to make it seem like Marl, I think it'd be cool if it had the Allure ability so it can try and cast Confuse on us, or cast Chaos. I think that'd be really cool because that's something that Marl does normally. And then, even if they call it something else, like, I don't know, if it does the same animation where she, like, slaps her butt or whatever. But I don't understand why we can't have that, because I think that would be kind of cool. It'd actually make it, like... I don't know, I just feel like it's kind of a useless ability in general, but in this case it would be really good from her position because she's by herself. So once the boss has been defeated, the Shade will then walk towards Marl, who will absorb it, and then this unlocks Marl's latent potential, which gives her an increase in her stats. Now that's all cool and all, but I don't know about you guys, but if I was fighting an evil shadow version of myself that was trying to kill me, and then I finally knocked it to the floor, and then it got up and started walking towards me, I would either slap it away or run away. I would not let it absorb into me. That just seems like a bad plan, you know what I'm saying? I've seen this movie. This is when the bad music starts playing. Get away from me! So earlier in the video, I was talking about how you wanted to farm a Lumicite Shard by either charming or killing a Wonder Rock there on the Frozen Mountain, because that's the easiest place in the game to get it, and I was saying it was super awesome. So now we're going to go collect the reward for that. So you want to head to 600 AD and go to Lost Sanctum, which is also unlocked after you've completed the Blackbird. Now I actually did this earlier in my playthrough, and I showed how to do all the Lost Sanctum stuff in a previous video, but anyways, just in like the first little bit, the first like 10-20 minutes of doing the Lost Sanctum quest, you will unlock the ability to come here in 600 AD, at which point you can speak with the Reptite that's on the left side in the top right doorway, and this one is looking for a Lumicite Shard. So now that we finally have one, you can bring it to it, and it will craft for us the Elemental Aegis, which is one of the best chess pieces in the entire game. It's for Luca exclusively. What it does is it will completely negate all elemental damage and make it do nothing. So it does no damage at all, which is really crazy and super overpowered. However, there are some little nuances to know about it. This is an amazing chess piece, however, it doesn't work in all situations. For example, this does not block magic damage, it blocks elemental damage specifically. Now remember that elemental damage can sometimes be physical or magical in nature, or even sometimes both. So a percentage of it could be magical, a percentage of it can be physical. In this particular case, it's actually more based on the element itself. So if it's either light, shadow, water, or fire, then it will be blocked with this particular chess piece. However, just because an attack is magical does not mean it's elemental. So there are some attacks that are specifically magical that will be blocked by magic defense, will be reduced by that specifically, but are not elemental, so they are not absorbed by the plates, and thus are not blocked by this particular chess piece either. A great example of this is actually just Lavos' initial attack called Laser Beams. That is magical, and so magic defense is what will reduce that. However, this does not block that at all. So all that being said, I'm just explaining that so that you understand that while this is an amazing chess piece and it's super overpowered and it makes some boss battles an absolute joke, there are times when still, like, the Prismatic Dress is just a better option for you, or the Royal Gown is still better. Alright, so next Vortex, this one is in 1000 AD, and it's right next to Chrono's house. It is a little bit awkward to land the Epic next to it, however, you can totally get there. It's just might take a couple tries to find the sweet spot where you can land, but once you finally arrive, again, walk into the portal to the north. This will take you to a series of rooms that are areas we've seen previously in the game. Something really super interesting to point out here. However, there is one area that is new and completely exclusive, which is like a mountainy, smoky area, which is, I assume, the entrance to the volcano, which is where we're headed. However, then there's another scene that is, again, another random place in the game right after that, before it actually enters the volcano itself. So I don't really know why they even decided to include that. I think it's cool. It's kind of an interesting looking area, but other than that, it doesn't really matter. So going back to talking about the Aegis, now, as far as when to use it, though, it's kind of a funny thing. Like, here we are at the end of the game, and yes, it's like one of the best things in the slot, it's amazing, but we don't really have anything left. We have, like, a couple bosses left here for the Dimensional Vortex, and then we have Dream Devourer, but other than that, that's it. I mean, you can fight Lavos again, and yes, it would be sweet for that, but there are certain attacks that he has, like I just explained, where it's not good for it, actually. It's quite specifically bad. So there's certain situations where the Elemental Aegis actually isn't a very good item, and it's actually the wrong choice. But anyways, one way you can tell, too, by the way, especially if you're going to play through on New Game Plus and you want to be super overpowered and make sure that enemies can't hurt you, even though, like, our physical and magical defense are so high that most of the bosses can't even hurt you anyway at this point, so I don't know, doesn't really matter. But anyways, if you really wanted to see, one way you could do that, by the way, would be just to look at the bestiary, because at this point, if you've already played through the game once and you're playing a New Game Plus, then you'll be able to look at all of the previous entries of enemies that we've acquired so far, including all the bosses we fought, and you can see, it'll show you if it has an elemental icon next to it, a little water droplet, or a little fire icon, or a little shadow spinny thing, or whatever, then you can tell if it has elemental attacks on that particular enemy or boss just in general. As a result, you can use that to determine whether or not you want to wear the Elemental Aegis for that particular fight. Alright, so welcome to the Volcano! Now in this first room, there's nothing we can do here for now, but just remember to come back here. We will come back here at a later time, so just bear that in mind. Continuing onwards, in the second room, you can ignore the dire rats, there's nothing we can do with them, and up ahead we have a fireball, which is another new enemy. Now this guy can actually be avoided, it will appear as soon as you get close, all you have to do is walk around it, so you can ignore that combat if you like. Those guys are kind of annoying. They actually, I think they guarantee counterattack on you, which is kind of awful. Continuing onwards, go to the far north where there's a room that has a couple chests, one of which has the Master's Crown. Now this is a male-only headpiece that is one of the best ones in the game. What it does is it gives you status immunity, and it also gives you a damage boost. Now, if you were going to wear the Vigilant hat, then this is a nice alternative because you might as well. It just has more armor, and it gives you a little bit of damage too, and I believe it's 20%, just like the sunglasses are. Now, in general, between the Haste Helm and the Master's Crown, I think the Haste Helm is overall better because, the difference between 16 speed and the cap of 24 with Haste is just better. Like, that's 33% more your action gauge fills up 33% more often, which means you're doing 33% more damage, as opposed to just 20% more damage from the Master's Crown, you know what I mean? So if you don't need the status immunity, then the Haste Helm is just better. And moving on, there's a new enemy here called a Red Gage. Now, this enemy will absorb fire, so you want to use just anything else. By the way, just in general, if you're unsure what to do for this dungeon, all the enemies will at least take damage from water attacks. So anything that's immune to certain things, like the fireballs, for example, will absorb light, shadow, and fire all at the same time, which is super annoying. So you have to use either water attacks or just physical on them. Now, as far as the gadgets are concerned, something you can do, too, for this whole area is actually a dual tech between Frog and Marl, which is Glacial Water, I believe is what it's called, and what that does is it just hits the whole screen with a water attack. It's basically like Water 2, just Water 2 and Ice 2 mixed together. But anyways, that's a nice ability that you can use. Normally, it's not really all that good, just in general. The damage it does is just kind of okay, but for this area, it's great, because all the enemies here are vulnerable to water. Now, in the far bottom right corner, you can actually go through the bottom left wall, and this will lead to a capsule, but you can also continue on towards the far bottom right beyond that, and it leads to a little hidden area where there's a chest containing the Dream Reaper. So this is the best scythe in the game for Magus, and it has a whopping 4 times damage on crit, which is pretty cool. Like, Chrono crits a lot just by himself, so he's critting all the time, but he's only doing whatever it is, 150 or 2 times damage, whatever it is. So this will hit for 4 times, which is really good. However, he doesn't hit very often because he only has like a 10% or 15% crit chance. I'm not even sure what his default chance is, but you can increase that if you like temporarily by giving him the accessory that is called the Dragon's Tear, which I believe it boosts it by 20%. So that's a pretty nice thing. So that brings it up to 30% or 35, whatever it is. So that's a pretty nice thing. So his physical damage is actually pretty darn good. Now, of course, that is at the expense of taking off a gold stud, and I just think overall that Magus is better off with a gold stud because he's a magic caster. There's not really a reason to be using it. If you need physical damage, then use somebody else, because that's just not his strong suit in general. And if you're going to be using him for magic, then a gold stud makes a lot more sense. Of course, what it really all boils down to is just what you need for a particular fight. Like, one of the cool things about putting the Dragon's Tear on Magus is then that means he's good at both physical and magical damage. So literally, like, the only thing he wasn't good at, now he can suddenly do, which is actually really, really cool. It makes him literally the most flexible character in the game, because he can do anything. He can do physical, or he can do any of the other elements, which is really, really cool. So if you need somebody with a lot of flexibility for a particular battle, then that would be a really nice thing to have. The red gages that are in this area can be kind of awful. They just do a lot of damage and they have a ton of health, but one thing you can do to take care of them really fast is just use a lot of triple techs. Most of them will actually do pretty decent damage to it. Just make sure that whatever you use is something that doesn't do fire damage. So instead, for example, I'm using Chrono, Marl, and Ayla. They have a triple tech called Final Kick, which I haven't really used very much, but it does enough damage to take these guys all out at once. Now, up ahead, there is some fireballs that you can kill if you like, although it doesn't really matter too much. However, before you leave, you want to go over to the far bottom right corner where there is a hidden area where you can open a chest that has the Spell Slinger. This is a weapon for Luca, which will change her damage to be based upon her MP. Now, I think overall this is just a really terrible weapon. What it does is it does, whatever the last digit is of her MP, it does 100 damage per number. So if it ends in a 9, then she does over, like, in the 900s. If it's, like, ends in 7, then she does in the 700s as far as physical damage. This means it does potentially more than the, like the Valkyrie bow, or not the Valkyrie bow, the Venus bow that Marl has. So it can do a lot of damage. However, the implication is then you're only using her for physical damage and you're not using her for spellcasting at all. And again, she is a spellcaster specifically. Now, again, the reason that it's cool is if you are facing an enemy that has greatly increased defenses. So if the physical defenses are crazy high and you can't penetrate its outer shell or whatever you're trying to do, then because its physical defenses are so high, she can cut through that entirely. So it's a very situational weapon, more so than Marl is, but I think it's kind of overall bad because the entire purpose of using Luca is to use her as a spellcaster. It's just not as flexible. Meanwhile, with Marl, like, her using the Venus Bow is kind of nice because she can still do everything else. It's not dependent upon anything else that she does. And Robo, you can deal with it by having somebody else heal him, so then you're going to be healing him anyways for a boss battle, If you're using Frog with Star Heal or whatever to heal the entire party, or using Lapis or whatever, then you're healing anyway. So even if you get smacked a little bit and then you bring him up to full, then he's at 999 health, so you can use the Crisis Arm to hit really hard with his abilities. Like, it's still, Robo's doing stuff the entire time. Meanwhile, with, I don't know, I guess you could make the same argument with Luca that if her mana runs out, somebody else can use a mid-ether. Like, you have Marl, she's only doing single-target stuff anyways, or she's using a mid-ether, whatever, and it boosts her damage back up so she can switch back to physical. But again, it's just weird. Switching back and forth between magic and physical is just strange for Luca. In the previous area with the ladders, you want to make sure you grab the Strength Capsule, and then otherwise the Death Creepers, the thing to know about them is just that they will absorb shadow, so you want to use something else. So like fire or something would be fine, whatever. Just use something that hits really hard, and you can take out all of them at once. Back in the next room, this leads us all the way back to the first room. You want to press the switch. This will lower all the lava throughout the entire volcano. Kill the red gauge here, and then go back across here. Now go back to the north. This will lead us back to the second room. You'll easily see on your map right away that there is a ladder to the north, so you want to take this down now that we have access to this, and go through the nearby doorway to find a switch, which will then deploy a ladder one room over. So go ahead and say yes, you want to deploy the ladder, and then go back out and go over to the far right. Because the lava is lowered, there's an area we can access over there as well. However, there was no ladder, but this switch is what unlocks that. So go over to the one screen to the right and use the ladder in the lower area to get to a new room. Something I realized when I was recording this is that I haven't run away this entire, during combat, for this entire walkthrough, I don't think, actually, which is crazy because I've done the whole game and I've just been killing everything because I'm just that kind of guy. Murder. But anyway, and I haven't been running away just because I'm a real man and men don't run away or anything like that. I just forgot about it. Whoops, I probably should have kept it more in mind because there are certain combats that would have been really nice to just run away for, But anyway, I'm going to recommend it up ahead because we have some fireballs. Now, these guys can be killed all at once with water attacks, but they do have this nasty habit of self-destructing, and it's super irritating. It's been a little while since I even recorded this gameplay, so I don't actually even remember exactly why. I think it's that they can one-shot your entire party if you use full-screen attacks. You can attack one of them at a time, but they're attacking you at the same time, and it's annoying. You have to heal through it all, and it just takes a while, and it's just easier to avoid it, and that's the reasoning, I think, off the top of my head. But I don't actually remember the specifics on that. But on the bright side, though, I am, making most of the enemies in the game go extinct, but I'm sparing the fireballs. It's my act of kindness for the day. We'll just go with that. That's what's really going on, right? So next we'll find ourselves back in Twilight Grotto, so go ahead and save, shelter up, and then round the corner to fight the once King Dalton. Gasp! So this is a boss that is in one of the 3 Twilight Grottos. According to guides online, they say that he can be in any of the time periods. Now, my experience has been that I always see him in 1000 AD. And I think that's actually what's going on. I think people are just mistaken. They just get these confused because all these zones look the same. But I think he's always in 1000 AD, both because that's what I have experienced, but also because I think that makes the most sense lore-wise. The whole reason they have him here is it's to kind of shoehorn in some connections between Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, because they changed a bunch of things and they just kind of completely rewrote the story, sort of. So they're trying to make these connections to make it make a little bit more sense and have some continuality between the two stories. So anyways, that's the whole reason that Dalton's here, or what they're implying with his dialogue. So the stuff that he's referring to happens just shortly after 1000 AD in the sequel. So the fact that we're seeing Dalton here in 1000 AD and he can't time travel and go around, you know what I mean? So I don't know, yeah, you know what I mean? So the gates are all closing down and whatever, and he's stuck here in 1000 AD and he's causing problems which lead to events that happen in the sequel in 1000 AD. It makes sense. So I think he's actually always in Twilight Grotto 1000 AD is my personal opinion. But anyways, a lot of guides online say he could be in any one of them, and I'm totally willing to be wrong. So if those of you who are watching this right now experience him in other time periods, just let me know in the comments, and we'll thumbs up that comment or whatever so we can make sure that we have accurate information here. But yeah, I'm trying my best here. Anyways, Dalton is super easy. He's kind of a joke. I think this is honestly his easiest form. He has more health and stuff like that, and he does do more damage, but honestly, if you're already at this point, you're if you're strong enough to kill Lavos, you're more than strong enough to deal with once King Dalton. Not a problem at all. So you should have way more than enough stats to deal with this, not a big deal. The one comment I will make is that he tends to focus on physical, so characters that are more resistant to physical, it'd be a little bit better. So You know, Ayla, Frog, Robo, Chrono would be a little bit better compared to the girls anyways, just because they have more physical resistance, but he does do a bunch of elemental damage too. Not that any of those hit really all that hard. Also, a fun fact, if you have the elemental Aegis with Luca, like I got earlier on in this video, then he could block a whole bunch of his attacks because half of his attacks are all elemental, so even though she takes more damage from physical, she wouldn't take as much damage from all his elemental stuff. Kind of the only thing to note about him is that you can't charm anything, which is sad, and then also the fact that he has a death counter, just like he always does in all of the various forms we fought of him. He has a belch ability that will hit the whole party for pretty decent damage, so you just want to make sure you're healed up or you have more than enough health to survive it by the time that you start getting towards the end of the battle. One of the things I think is kind of funny about the healers is, like, you know, this guy has a lot of attacks that will hit the whole party, and so it might seem like you should be using Frog or Robo as a healer, but at the same time, if you have Marl, then she can haste everybody, and even though Marl is just single target healing anyways, because she can haste, that means she's healing faster than the other healers would anyways. So, although at the same time, like, now that we're a lot faster in general, like, because we have 16 speed total, that means that getting up to 24 speed means we're only 33% faster, so it is faster, but not as big of a deal as it was earlier in the game. When we only had 12 speed and we bumped up to 24, it was twice as fast. You know, so the difference between 100% more versus 33% more is not as big. But anyways, you see what I mean? So, like, it's kind of this weird thing. Like, I don't really think that Marl is really that much worse compared to other potential characters. Although, again, like, because I think haste is definitely one of the best buffs you can possibly have. So even though, sure, we could throw on, like, a Dark Helm or whatever for this fight, but I think it makes more sense to just use, like, haste helms or something would be way better. Moving on, just like all of the Twilight Grottos, you're going to have a character who will walk forward. In this case, that is going to be Chrono, and he says nothing. He just, of course, just hears something and just goes off mutely by himself, which is even more disturbing than somebody at least talking about it, I suppose. But anyways, we're going to face off against his shadow, which is going to be Steel Shade. Now, just the same as the Marl fight, we now have this guy who is immune to light, but is weak to shadow. So ideally, you want to use shadow attacks because you'll do additional damage. Other than that, the only thing you need to know is just the fact that it does pretty decent physical damage. I think this is a lot harder than the Marl counterpart fight, because he does quite a bit more damage. Doesn't heal, though. However, he has a lot more health than the other one does. So I suppose this kind of makes up for it a little bit. But regardless, what you want to do is try and charm the guy first of all, because he has Prism Spectacles, which are super valuable. Really nice item. If you can get Prism Specs on all of your characters, it's pretty darn powerful. Especially for dual techs and triple techs, you can make them significantly stronger. I think that's actually more true than people realize at first glance. Like, take Fire Whirl, for example. Like, Chrono using Cyclone by itself and Luca using Flamethrower by itself, both of them together to make Fire Whirl does more damage total than each one of them separate. And that's a concept, like, that everybody realizes, right? But one thing I don't think people really think about is the fact that by increasing the damage with the Prism Specs by 50%, it makes those dual techs even that more nasty. Like, because the multiplyer's already higher, it makes it just, it pushes it that much further over the top. So this boss is immune to lightning, so whatever you do with Chrono, you just ideally want to avoid any kind of lightning attacks, like Thunder Chomp that I'm using right here. Mistake. As soon as I selected it, I was like, oh, and I realized my mistake as soon as I did it. But anyways, this boss is immune to lightning, but it's also weak to shadow. Now what you want to do is, ideally for the team composition that you bring, you want your party to be somebody that can do a triple tech with Chrono that's something other than lightning, which isn't really that hard to pull off. I think almost all of the triple techs are either physical or something else. So in this particular case, both Ayla and Marl with Chrono can do Final Kick, which is a shadow-based attack. It's single target only, and I haven't really been using it this entire walkthrough. However, it is really good for this boss. Super good because it does additional damage to him. So it allows Chrono to actually be a little more useful as opposed to just using Frenzy. So as far as the boss goes, this guy's not too bad. He does have more health, but he doesn't heal like the Marl Shade does. But generally speaking, he will do quite a bit more damage just overall. Just both really high physical and magical damage. In particular, Scintillation is a pretty nasty ability. It's kind of a low chance for him to use that, but it's his version of Luminaire. Again, I don't understand why we have to have different titles for these things, but yeah, Scintillation hurts really, really bad. If you don't have a lot of magic defense, it can just one-shot one of your characters. So kind of the big thing to make sure you survive this boss, just kind of top off with healing every once in a while. In my case, I have so much defenses, I'm so high level that this guy doesn't really do any damage to me. Now, because this boss does so much lightning damage, you can also wear Radiant Helms to have the lightning damage as well, or wear White Plates so that they heal you instead, and that would be even better. Now, at this point in the walkthrough, you should be able to have at least 2 White Plates, if not more, so that's pretty good. You could put them on your whole party, maybe. And that would block half of the damage he does. Unfortunately, he does do really high physical damage. However, that is all single target, which means that characters like Ayla or Marl are still pretty good because they can just use single target heals to deal with anybody who gets low. So if you have one character who's just single target healing every once in a while, and the 2 characters are just going all out with damage, then you'll probably be fine. So once again, after you have defeated the Shade, then it will walk towards Chrono and he'll absorb it and it'll give him some stats. Now, these stats are slightly different than what Marl got. He gets a little bit of strength and speed and accuracy. Accuracy is like kind of nice, especially because Chrono does a lot of like counterattacks and stuff like that and crits really hard with his abilities. So being able to be a little bit more accurate with it is kind of nice. It's not required or anything, but that's okay. Meanwhile, his other two stats are probably maxed out for most of you right about now because it's unlikely that a lot of you are even in Dimensional Vortex without having Chrono maxed out on strength. So our next vortex is just north of Genodome in 2300 AD, and this little transition area I think is super sweet looking. I don't know why the green just is cool. It reminds me of the Borg or something, I don't know. So next we find ourselves in this room with a whole bunch of children. Now each one of these 4 children will ask us questions about various things in the game, and there's 4 possible answers for each question. So each kid, there's 4 kids, each one of them has 8 possible questions. So I have the list of the questions and the correct answers on the right side of the screen. I'm not going to talk about this, I'm just going to you can just look over all the questions and stuff. There is actually, I didn't list all of the wrong answers because there's no point in doing that, so don't waste everybody's time. If you've been paying attention to what characters are saying and stuff and reading the dialogue, then you should actually know all this stuff. I actually think this is kind of neat at the end of the game. Like, unlike, say, the Keaton questions in Majora's Mask, which you do pretty early on in the game, and it's all these questions about Clocktown, I feel like this is a lot cooler because it's questions about events that took place, and, like, I don't know, yeah, it's just like testing your knowledge of the game after you've already completed it, which if you did it right now, it makes sense. If you put down the game and like put it down for a while and then finally picked it back up again and now you're finally doing Dimensional Vortex, all this is probably going to be super vague, or if you're just button mashing through the whole game, then you probably don't know the answer to any of these, and that could be a little bit more awkward. But yeah, I think it's cool because it's like, you're rewarded for your knowledge, I guess. It feels a little bit more rewarding in this case, I guess, compared to other games that I've played that make you do stuff like this as well. Or like, at least the placement, the pacing feels better, I guess. Also, just like the Dimensional Vortex is just weird in general. There's just weird stuff happening, so like having these random kids with no explanation for why they're there asking us weird questions about stuff for a quiz is like, it feels less strange here because everything's already weird, so it's like, oh, okay, sure, you know, whatever. And like, I think that's kind of fun. Like, it just feels more appropriate here than other places in the game, I suppose. I guess part of the reason why it makes me feel excited is just that, like, this game has so much lore and so much, like, dialogue we paid attention to, and so then we're rewarded for that knowledge we've been accumulating the entire time, and I feel like that's nice. I kind of find it sad that there's only 4 questions, though, and I wish there was maybe some other reward just for that. Like, I wouldn't mind playing through, like, a big, long quiz that was, like, I don't know, 30 questions, and then, like, you know, you get some awesome item as a reward just for that. Just that. That's all you do. So you just go to Dimensional Vortex, and it's a whole bunch of kids quizzing you, you know, and they get progressively harder. I think it'd be kind of cool. So here in 2300 AD, as soon as you arrive in the facility, you'll see there's a note that says that the dude who designed this place liked to make things backwards on purpose. And so next you want to go to the far bottom left corner where you'll see there's a note that has a clue on what the password is for this dungeon. And the guy there says that the password is LLAB, because he likes round things. Now you put those 2 clues together and you'll realize that the correct password is actually ball, B-A-L-L. So go ahead and write that down or whatever, just remember that, but that's the password that we need for later on in this dungeon. So with that information in hand, you can continue on towards the far top left corner of the room in order to go on with the dungeon. Although, if you would like to get some extra goodies with me, instead you can go to the far bottom right where there is some goodies we can grab. Now these are optional at this point, you can't get them later. I would just like to get them out of the way just so that I don't forget. But in order to get to the bottom right corner, you need to go to the far top right. So work your way over towards the top right and then steadily work your way towards the far bottom right, and I'm going to just fast forward through all these. All these enemies don't really need to know anything super exciting about these. These searchers will absorb shadow, but honestly you can just defeat them with regular attacks because, like, if all 3 of your characters attack it with a regular attack, you're probably defeated instantly anyways, so it's not really a problem. So once you finally get to the far bottom right corner, the wall on the right, you'll see that there's like a little path over there, and you can actually walk through this wall. It's a fake wall, hidden passage, yay! And what this will do is it leads to a clearing, because that makes total sense inside a factory. And this clearing is the same area as what you saw in the Lost Sanctum in Millennia Woods, which is cool and everything, like whatever, but they're just reusing tile sets, I guess. And there's a whole bunch of chests here that are hidden in little alcoves and stuff, so I'm going to show you where all those hidden chests are. What we're really interested in is the fact that we can get the Apocalypse arm here. This is one of the best arms in the game for Robo. Now, unfortunately, this will reduce his overall weapon damage, which means that his physical techs are reduced. So attacks like Rapid Fire Fist, are not going to do as much damage anymore, which is kind of sad. Only some of his attacks actually scale with that, and some of his techs, so I think like Fire Punch, for example, scales with it, and so does like Beast Toss, for example, so it'll make that do less damage. So the Crisis Arm or the Dragon Arm would do more damage with those. What the Apocalypse Arm does is it increases the damage of his regular attack. Like, his regular attack actually does a little bit less damage overall, but when he crits on it, then he always does 9,999 damage, which is insane. Now, defaultly, Robo has a 10% chance to crit. However, you can increase that by equipping the Dragon's Tear, which is an accessory that you get from the Lost Sanctum. It's one of the first items you get there. And what this will do is it boosts it to 30% chance to crit, which means that he's like not quite a third of all of his attacks. He's basically doing 10,000 damage all the time, which is kind of insane. When a lot of bosses only have 30,000 life, like, I don't even know, you just do this a couple times and you just win. So if you can haste Robo, or give him a haste helm or whatever, then he can just punch things all day long and he'll just destroy everything. Especially really hard enemies, it's just kind of gross. The random chance on it is a little bit annoying though, so it could take a little while before it actually kicks in, but it's still a really powerful ability. Now, just so you know, Ayla will eventually be able to do the same thing and do it even better, but that really starts shining once she starts getting to level 96, when she gets the Bronze Fist. Work your way all the way back to the far top left corner, and then in this room what you need to do is avoid all these sentries up ahead. So you just want to work your way back and forth while avoiding their sight, and it just works exactly like you'd think that would. I know that sometimes they're facing north or south as far as their graphic, but there's a vision cone basically in whatever direction they're facing, so you just want to work your way around. If they see you, what'll happen is they'll push you into a room off to one side. I think you actually fight some combat. I actually don't remember off the top of my head, but something like that happens. Anyways, when you work your way to the far top left corner, well, you'll eventually come to a control console. We now need to input the password. So again, it is LLAB backwards, which is ball, B-A-L-L. So just press those numbers very carefully, or press those buttons very carefully on your controller, and this will then deactivate the security system. So next, you want to work your way back to the previous room and then sneak past all of the guards. Again, you can get past these sentries by either sneaking past them like this, or you can actually let them catch you on purpose, because then they'll take you to the far top right corner of the room. But generally, I try to avoid them, though, whatever you want to do here. Spoiler alert! So here we have, our characters are about to be, like, unusable for the next little bit. So you can swap out your characters real quick if you want, if you specifically want to use this team, because as soon as you enter this room, then you'll be locked in and you can't do anything. Then meanwhile, our other characters, 3 of our other characters, will then appear on the other side of the door and will then work their way towards trying to unlock us. Isn't this, like, against the rules? Can't you only have 3 people, like, traveling through time at any given point? They're breaking the rules. We already had this happen earlier when, like, we went to each one of the end points of the Dimensional Vortex called Twilight Grotto. Then one of our characters will appear if you don't currently have them in your party. So we have 4 characters in the same time period at the same time, which is a big no-no. You're not supposed to do that. But anyways, whatever. Also, I guess, technically, though, we have the Epic and we also have the portals, so I suppose, if you were going to use different ways of getting to each time period, then it wouldn't matter, but technically this island you can't even get to Genodome without using the Epic anyway, so I'm not sure how this works. As Gasper explained at the end of time, I think the deal is just you can't have more than 3 people, otherwise what happens is it will always send you to the end of time. So, that being said, having, like, 3 people, I think if you just send 3 people through the gate, and then send another 3 people through the gate, then it would be totally fine. Also, you know how the Epic, like, follows us around and stuff? Like, I don't understand why we can't just, like, bring our characters and then, like, bring the Epic back, or have us all, like, we can sit on laps, I'm totally a lap sitter, I can do that, we can just take the Epic and go repeatedly, it's fine. But anyways, as far as going through gates, though, I don't really think sending more than 3 people through the gates is a problem. It's just sending them through at the exact same time. If you did send 4 people at the same time, though, it's not like it destabilizes the gates or anything. It's not the end of the world. It's just the end of time. Seriously, though, if you could have all 7 characters, like, punching a boss at the same time, it'd be temporal murder. So with our party, you want to go back to the conveyor belt room and go to the far top right corner. This door is now open. That's what the password accomplished. So next, in this room, you'll see there's a series of sparklies. What happens is when you step into them, it will teleport you around the room. Now, the basic rule of thumb is just the fact that the right one will always take you onward, and the left ones or any other direction will take you backwards. So what you want to do is just keep working your way right over and over and over again. Eventually, you'll come to a place where there is a door, and what you want to do is you can either go into the door to do what we came for. However, that will end this thing. We'll switch back to our other characters. What you want to do is actually go right once more to find a chest containing the Regal Armor, or Regal Plate. What this does, this is an armor piece for guys only that's pretty good. It has 10 magic defense and 10 stamina/vigor. This will mean it will reduce his physical damage you take, and I actually think the best character to put this on is going to be Magus. It's a little bit better than the Shadow Plume robe. I don't know, it kind of depends. Until he's maxed out on stamina, I think this is overall a smarter chest piece for him, but whatever you want to do he's the one who's going to get the most benefit out of it. but other characters are good with it too. I do think that the Saurian leathers are kind of nice as well, at least for now, but that's another potential option too. So return back to the beginning, then just keep following the right sparklies to continue onwards until you get to the room where there is the doorway. Once you enter, you'll then have this gauntlet of enemies that we have to fight in a row without any pauses in between. Most of these enemies aren't really a problem. We have some more of those searchers. These guys will absorb shadow abilities, so you just want to avoid that. Meanwhile, the prototypes are weak to lightning, so you can do additional damage with that. What's really important, though, to note is we have a new enemy here at the end called an Iron Maiden. This is like an upgraded version of the Synchronites that we saw in the Black Omen, but it's pretty beefy, and honestly, I think it's probably the hardest regular enemy in the entire game. Now, you shouldn't have too much trouble with it, like at this point, especially if you have a lot of stats, it's not really a problem. But just as a comment, it does have 10,000 life, which is a lot. So it's really, really beefy. It has some pretty decent physical defenses as well, so ideally use magic damage on it. And it has some pretty nasty counterattacks. It has Osmos, which can absorb your MP, and it will also self-destruct as a death counter once it's finally low. So you want to make sure you heal up before you kill it, otherwise it will just totally one-shot your whole party, and that can be kind of awful. It's super annoying. Do this whole quest, and then all of a sudden it self-destructs, and then you're like, great, I have to start the whole thing all over again from the last save point, and it's just awful. So anyways, that's just something to keep in mind. So I guess one thing that's kind of sad is because the characters that we had that put in the password are locked in, we can't use them right now. So if I had planned out a little bit ahead of time and not had Robo with me for that part, then I could have had him with me for this battle. Because this boss takes, or this, not boss, it's a regular enemy. This enemy takes increased damage from magic compared to physical. It doesn't take as much damage. It takes reduced damage from physical, pretty highly physical resistant. But Robo can cut through that guaranteed with the Apocalypse Arm and do 9,999 damage when he crits, which is just 1 HP shy of this enemy's total HP pool anyway. So he has a 30% chance to do that. Like, it's a pretty good chance that'll happen before too many attacks, you know? So if Robo's doing that, even if this guy is, like, absorbing his MP, it doesn't matter, because he's not using that for his attack anyway, you know? So I will say, like, overall, these enemies get my vote for the, like, hardest enemy in the entire game, the hardest regular enemy, which is kind of awful. Like, in fact, if we were to face this guy just a little while ago when we were a little bit lower, and as a mini-boss, whatever, it wouldn't be, like, too surprising to me. It's just, like, really, really high stats. Most of the mini-bosses and bosses in this game are kind of gimmicky, or they have, like, specific... you want to avoid, whatever, they'll absorb certain elements or whatever, there's certain things that you just don't want to do with them, and other things you do want to do, and this enemy doesn't really have anything like that. It's just the fact that it's pretty beefy, and the fact that it's fairly physical resistant. In the case of Armageddon Arm, that bypasses that, as does the Venus Bow that Marl is currently using. Like the Spell Slinger, for example, that we have with Luca, is cool, but it's not good for this guy because he uses Osmos, so he'll remove the MP, and as a result, Luca will go from doing, like, in the 900s to doing nothing with a regular attack. She'll literally just do 0 damage because it takes 9 MP, So, yeah, it'll reduce her from 900 to 0 to, like, 100 the next time. It's just, like, awful. So once you finally completed the gauntlet, then you want to interact with the console just north of you, and this will unlock all of the various lasers and doors and stuff that were keeping our previous characters locked in, and we finally have access to them again. So now what you want to do is you can swap out your characters for whoever you want, but steadily work your way towards the far bottom left corner of the room. As always, though, you want to avoid these sentries from seeing you, as their line of sight is what matters, otherwise they'll knock you back into a previous holding pen area, and then you'll have to work your way back through here again. Now remember that these little black parts of I guess it's a wall or a flooring, or I don't know, it's an abyss. Regardless, we can't walk on that, so you have to walk on the actual tiling. But work your way forward towards the far bottom left, and then continue on towards the north. In this next room, we have all these electrical currents that are traps that'll get in your way. If you walk into them, or they electrocute you as you're, like, right on top of them, they'll do 30 damage to you every time, so just want to time out how you walk in between. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Like, we have so much life that if you get hit every once in a while, like, who cares? Now, as far as these enemies, once again, we have more Iron Maidens. Now, as far as the 2 ways to deal with them, I feel like the best method is either to do some really hard single target damage. Our best bet right now is going to be using the Apocalypse Arm with Robo, but otherwise using just really hard-hitting magic is the way to go. So I just, generally speaking, like to just keep using something like Dark Matter or Flare or something like that, and Antipode Bomb 3 or Mega Bolt or something like that, but whatever, just use something really, really hard-hitting that's really expensive with some gold studs. You can take care of these guys really good. I find it a little bit sad that it's kind of like gold studs are just so good in this game that, like, towards the end of the game, you're just using really hard-hitting attacks that just destroy everything like this, and it's kind of like It's the only way to go. It's just so much better than everything else. And that, by the way, is the reason why we're getting items like the Apocalypse Arm. So the deal is, like, all these characters, all our males, are already capped on strength already. So I already am maxed out on that. I have 99 strength, so I can't get any more physical damage. I already have the best weapons in the game. I already have the highest stat that affects that. So the only way to increase it at this point is to wear the prismatic spectacles, you know? So that'll increase my damage temporarily for my regular attack and for my physical techs, but they're already kind of capped. And then meanwhile, magic damage is just going to keep getting better. Like, I think Magus has something like maybe 70 magic at most. Maybe he has 60 or something at this point. And then meanwhile, Chrono only has like 45 or something like that. So like Chrono's, so yeah, if Chrono's magic damage is going to double if I keep playing, that's a lot of magic damage, you know what I mean? Like, he's already, like, look at this ability I'm using right now, Megavolt. I'm just destroying these guys with this ability, and it's only half as strong as it's going to get. So, like, what that means is that all my physical damage is going to keep lagging behind and getting worse and worse until eventually Frenzy is just awful. And so, what they did to try and compensate for that power imbalance, as far as late game, is they gave us a bunch of really good weapons. So Chrono's, like, crits are getting higher and stuff like that, and then meanwhile, Robo has the Apocalypse Arm, which has a chance to be super, super nasty. So depending on how you spec him out, one thing I find sort of sad about that is that, like, the Apocalypse Arm does less damage with, like, Rapid Fire Fist. It just makes those abilities not worth it. It just kind of is weird because, like, I mean, I guess it's fine because on the one hand, that means that abilities like Megavolt, like this, just do super, super good damage because he's going to keep getting stronger with his magic stat, and then otherwise his single target physical techs, you don't need to use those because you can use the Apocalypse Arm to do regular damage, which is even better. So, I don't know. It's just a little bit weird, though. I just find it strange that, like, you know, we started the game using regular techs, and then it was, like, garbage, and then we started getting some techs, and it started getting more awesome, and our techs got more awesome, and more awesome, and more awesome, and they're still getting more awesome, and then we're back to using regular techs again, which just feels backwards. We went back to the basics, guys. I mean, ultimately what this boils down to is the fact that this game, the base game, was never intended to have these items in the first place, and it was one of the power imbalance issues back then. So this is just a way of the developers, like, dealing with the power creep problem and trying to implement new mechanics that don't, like, break the stats and stuff that we already have, so it keeps it all relatively balanced. So the problem was that our regular attack is really weak, but our physical damage on our physical techs is, like, pretty decent, so they didn't want to, like, make our... We don't want to, you know what I mean? You can't increase the strength. So what they did is they gave you crit chance. Crit chance only affects your regular attacks, does not affect your techs. So it's just a really nice way of them doing that. So they figured it out, a good way for doing that. It's actually pretty clever, honestly. Alright, so Twilight Grotto once again. This time we're facing against Luca's Shade, and this time it's a little bit harder because she has similar health to what the Marl clone did, except this one also has the Exterminator at the same time, which also has the same amount of health as the other one, and it heals, and has a bunch of nasty status effects, and it has opposite elemental resistances and stuff like that compared to the Shade. It's just super annoying. This is a really obnoxious fight, definitely the hardest of the three. So that all being said, as far as taking them out, one of the awkward things is that their weaknesses are opposites, which is kind of annoying. So the Egg, ideally, you're using fire, and then for the Crimson Shade, ideally, you're using water. And so a lot of our full screen attacks will actually just end up making them not take very much damage. Like, the only thing that really works on everything that you can use with a full screen attack is going to be water stuff, and that would be like, you know, Magus using water too, and then like Frog and Marl using glacier water, for example. That would be something you could do. And that's okay, but otherwise I think you're better off with physical. So if you really want to take them both out at the same time, I think you'd be better off with like Chrono and Ayla's Falcon Strike, or like Robo and Chrono's Max Cyclone, otherwise called Cyclone Sweep. You can have Robo in the third slot, so he's on the right, and have Chrono in slot number 2, and then that would guarantee that you can hit both the Exterminator and the Crimson Shade at the same time. That's a really obscure strategy, but if you really wanted to do that, that would be probably the best way to do something like that. Otherwise, you could probably like make sure that Frog is pretty low, and then you could use like one of the Frog attacks, like Frog Squash or something like that. That's okay. The problem is you'd have to make sure he's really hurt first. Now, of course, for this battle, you can totally just use Robo's regular attack with the Apocalypse Arm and the Dragon's Tear, and that would be amazing. I'm just not doing it because I want to show some regular strategies instead for this battle, but that is, of course, a potential option, especially considering that this is the dungeon where we got that item. That's kind of obvious and boring, though, so I wanted to show some actual strategies and show other ways you can do this. So in this example, what I'm doing is I'm using Frenzy with Chrono, and I'm using Blaze Kick between Luca and Ayla to attack the Egg, because the Egg is weak to fire. So this is a great way I can do that. Otherwise, I could also do it the other way around. A Frenzy typically does more damage than Triple Kick, is one of the reasons why I was doing it that way. So Chrono doing Frenzy as opposed to doing like Fire Sword 2 and whatever it's called. Yeah, doing Fire Sword 2 and Triple Kick is not as good as doing Blaze Kick and Frenzy. So that's why I was doing it in that order. So once the egg is destroyed, though, you can switch to the main problem, and you can either keep using Frenzy if you want to, but we just need to avoid using fire attacks at this point. So what I'm doing is I'm actually, because I would like to be able to still attack with Luca, I can just attack regularly or something, but it's better if I can have her do some kind of attack, but it can't be fire. So some triple techs and dual techs will actually change the element to something else. One easy one I'm doing with this team composition is Gatling Kick, which is a triple tech that does shadow damage. One other potential option is just to abandon the idea of Luca attacking at all, and you can do like Beast Toss with Robo would be pretty good. So if you put the Crisis Arm on him and then have him and Ayla in the party, and then have them both wear Prism Spectacles so that they're getting another 50% more damage, and then just have Luca just keep using like mid potions or Lapis to heal the whole party, or just Robo to keep his health up. Because it wouldn't even take that much just to keep him from taking too much damage from special attacks, especially if you have high stats. So if just little, garbage potions can keep him alive, you just make sure you heal him right before he does the attack, and then he could probably do at least 6,000 damage, if not closer to like, 8,000 or something or more with Beast Toss. And so it would only take like 2 of those, or 3, to kill each one of these guys, so it's pretty darn good. Now here I'm showing the battle again. As an alternative, what you can do is you can use Fire Sword 2 to just hit either one of them. It actually hits in an AoE, but see, because Crimson Shade is immune to fire, but then meanwhile, the you also have like Antipode Bomb 3, for example, and a couple other attacks. A lot of them are Shadow that hit the whole screen, and those will heal the Exterminator. So you don't want to use Antipode Bomb 3 yet. So what I'm doing right now is I'm using the Venus Bow with Marl to hit the Crimson Shade, because I might as well. And then I'm using Fire Sword 2 on both of them, which will do nothing to the Crimson Shade, but it will guarantee to do damage to the Exterminator. It's just the highest damage fire dual tech I have between these two characters. So that's just one potential option if you don't want to use Ayla. As a quick comment too, by the way, you can bring Ayla. The only thing that you can charm here is a Nova armor from the Crimson Shade, which that's kind of meh. Like, you can buy those and you can also get them on the Black Omen or whatever, so it's not really that big a deal. So I don't think it's super worth it. You can charm it if you want to, but it's just not worth your time. The other thing I'm showing with this combat is the fact that I'm wearing the red plate this time, just so you can see how even if I have like not a super ideal team composition, that red plate just makes me invulnerable. I would still recommend though that you take out the Exterminator as soon as possible. Another thing that you could do with this fight is you could just ignore lock, like especially if you're using magic attacks on everything, then it doesn't really matter. Like if you're hitting the whole screen anyways, then your accuracy doesn't matter at all. So if you're instead using, you just use like Panacea/Heal to get rid of the lock status effect on whoever that gets applied to. So then at that point, then you can just go back to fighting and just do whatever you want. If you get blinded or poisoned, you just don't care, you just ignore it entirely, then it's whatever. I think, I'm actually not sure if blind will make your techs miss more. I think physical techs still get miss chance off of that. I'm actually not sure. Well, anyway, same process generally speaking, though. I'd still recommend taking out the Exterminator first because the Crimson Shade isn't really worth messing with. Or, yeah, like especially if you're wearing the red plate, there's no reason to go ahead and attack her first because she's just going to heal you anyway. So it's just like a nice thing where you don't even need a healer. So at that point, you don't even need Marl. I do have her right now, but I was just showing how it's kind of redundant if I have her when I don't really need a healer. So I could have Robo or Ayla or Frog or whatever and just go straight up like really hard physical techs. Unfortunately, we do have to have Luca mixed in with this, so I did do this because so that we had Delta Force, was the reason that I have Chrono as well. That's why I have Marl, so that I could do shadow damage for this phase. So just like the other ones, once you have defeated her, then the Shade will then merge with Luca. Again, this is just creepy. I would not let this evil thing come over to me, but she'll then get some speed, magic, and stamina, which is the 3 stats that she needed most. Of course, in my case, I am actually maxed out on speed at the moment. The other 2, though, are going to take a long time to fill up, though, so this is a nice little boost. So once you have completed all of the dimensional vortices, you want to return to the end of time and speak with the old man here, who is Gasper, and he will call out to you as soon as you arrive and tell you to speak with him. You can speak with him with any characters, it doesn't matter. I don't think there's actually any, like, variance in the dialogue at all, depending on who you bring or whatever. But go ahead and make sure you save too, by the way, real quick. But anyways, speaking with Gasper, he will then tell you that he senses some disturbances in the Force, and there's some kind of foe he can sense just on the edge of time's eclipse, and you can get there by using the bucket that is behind him. So this is some roundabout ways of doing this. Anyways, this leads you to the final bonus boss of the entire game, which is much more difficult than Lavos, and that is the Dream Devourer. So I've mentioned this previously, but there is a sequel to this game called Chrono Cross, which is for the PlayStation, and my understanding of that game, I have not played that one, my understanding is that the lore is very different. Like, the thing is, the events that happen in that game and some of the stuff they talk about in the past doesn't really quite make sense compared to this game. Like, some things conflict and such, so there's events and, like, names of items and stuff like that, and locations of things that don't quite match up and stuff like that. So part of this whole DS remake, like bonus content stuff, is to try and like have some additional lore that kind of ties them together and makes them make a little bit more sense and make them more coherent to explain their connections. So think of it like the earlier Star Wars movies, you know, episode 1 through 3. So that's what's going on here. And so that all being said, we are now off to face the Dream Devourer, which is kind of like an implied similar boss to the final boss of the sequel. So that's what's going on right now. And so we're going to go fight that boss right now, but not actually be able to defeat him for good is kind of the thing. It's just an optional boss. You can't actually seal him away or whatever is what's going on right now. So that's what we're doing. But you know, I again have not played the sequel, so I don't actually know that much about it, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. That's my understanding so far of why this is all happening, and there's some events that happen in this like extended credits, this next ending we're about to unlock, and that's what it's referencing. I know it's confusing and stuff and weird, but that's what's going on, is they're trying to make connections between this and the sequel. Alright, so the first thing to know about this boss is that halfway through the battle it becomes magic immune, so we are not able to damage it with magic attacks at all. So you just want to bring pure physical damage for this, so, you know, Chrono, Ayla, Frog, Robo would be your best bets by far. You can use other characters, they're just not as good though. There's no real reason to do that, and plus these characters take less damage from physical attacks anyways, so I don't know, it's just better. Now, what you want to do is for your accessories, what I'd recommend, because we're using only physical, you either want to boost your physical damage with your techs as much as possible, so I'd recommend putting on the Prism Spectacles, which would be super awesome. Otherwise, you can try and focus on your regular attacks. So in the example of Robo, he has on the Apocalypse Arm as well as the Dragon's Tear that I got in Lost Sanctum, so that makes him so his regular attack is amazing, which is super good. Now, otherwise, I can also just use his Heal Beam with him. Now, one of the reasons why the prismatic specs are good is because they boost the damage, but that makes all the techs really expensive, right? Well, the main thing I'm using Ayla and Frog for is actually to use Slurp Kiss so that they can heal everybody with that, and that only costs 1 MP for both of them, just regardless, so reducing the cost with the gold stud doesn't matter. Meanwhile, if I have the Prism specs, they can also switch to attacking if I want to, but that means that their damage will be really high when I do attack with them. Make sense? Part of the reason for that actually is the fact that the boss is going to be absorbing MP from all of the MP from one character all the time. He's going to keep doing it over and over and over again. It's super annoying. So, because he's stealing all the MP anyways, it doesn't matter if our stuff is inefficient because we're going to lose it all regardless. Another really great accessory you can bring for this is the Wrath Band. It's super nice because you're just counterattacking all the time. It's just super good. And then otherwise, another really good option is if Ayla is a super high level anyways, if she's like 96 or higher, then definitely the Valor Crest was going to be the best item for her by far. That's an Ayla exclusive item. However, until she's level 96, it's just kind of an okay accessory. So anyways, I feel like the prison specs are going to be better overall. Now, if you remember from the credits, if you got the main ending with me by taking the Black Omen route, then you would see Magus left through the gate to try and go searching throughout time to try and find Shala and figure out what happened with her after, you know, the Black Omen went into the sky or whatever. So that's what he's been doing. So we find him here in Time's Eclipse by taking the bucket. And this is future Magus. You can actually have regular Magus, you know, the past Magus in your party and stuff, and they don't react to each other at all or anything. There's no funky dialogue or anything. So you can just ignore that. So what future Magus says is he says, oh, there's a big bad thing up ahead. I'm on the trail of finding Shala, and there's a big nasty thing up ahead, so you should totally, you know, go away, enter at your own peril kind of thing, and then he jumps into this gate to go fight future Lavos by himself. So now he's going to fail just like he did the last time he fought Lavos by himself, and like that worked so great the last time he did that, you know? But anyways, so now we follow him in here, and he'll then get knocked out of the way, and we have to fight against the Dream Devourer ourselves. Now, a quick comment about this. This is supposed to be a reference to the end boss of Chrono Cross, I believe is my understanding. Again, I have not played that game, so I don't actually know what all this is supposed to mean. This is a reference to it. They don't ever actually quite specifically come out and say that, but that's kind of what they're implying. So let's talk about defenses real quick. So one of the nastiest abilities that this boss has is called Heavenly Peel. It's a single target lightning attack that does at least 900 damage, so it'll pretty much one-shot most of your characters. It's really hard to avoid, and yes, you can totally use a white plate to avoid it, but I don't think it really matters because if one of your characters dies, you can just res them anyway, so I don't really think it's that big a deal. It's kind of like, it's a very small chance for it to happen, and most of your characters will survive regardless, but if you don't, it's not really the end of the world, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. More important than that by far is going to be the, the barrier and protect buffs, which will drop physical and magical damage by 1/3. Now you can accomplish this by simply using the barrier spheres and shield spheres. So I'd highly recommend you just have all of your characters use one of each real quick, because that will help you a lot to survive. As a reminder, if you are missing some of these, you can get them from the Black Omen. Like just about all the enemies there drop them when defeated. So if you just do a quick run through there, you'll end up with tons of these stupid things. So they're great. I think they're really good for all of the endgame bosses, but this boss in particular just hits so hard that it just helps a lot to help you survive it. Probably one of the biggest things that will help you survive this fight is just making sure you're high enough level. If most of your characters are like in the 50s, like 55 range, whatever, you're probably maxing out magic defense in particular. And that's one of the biggest things that will help you survive. So as long as you have high enough magic defense, either with equipment or just because you're high enough level, and then you also have been using the barrier spheres and shield spheres, then most of these attacks you should survive, including Heavenly Peel. So I wouldn't really worry about it too much. It'll probably be fine, as long as you are staying on top of making sure your characters are totally full all the time. As far as a team composition goes, the one I'm using on screen right now is very safe. I have like a good amount of physical damage with all these characters, but I also have some really good healing. I have Heal Beam with Robo, I have Star Heal with Frog, but I also have Slurp Kiss between Frog and Ayla. This will heal the whole party 999 once Ayla gets to 35 magic, which isn't really all that much. It scales only with her magic stats, so as long as you give her enough magic capsules / tabs, you're guaranteed that she can actually full heal the entire party really, really well with that ability. Now, unfortunately, that does mean that you're kind of like only using Frog and her for that for the most part, and not really using them for damage. But as you've seen, like if Robo can hit for 9,999 occasionally, even though it's a small chance for that to happen, if he's just punching every once in a while with his regular attack, and then meanwhile the other two characters are keeping everybody totally alive, then that's fine. That's actually pretty decent damage. One quick comment about counters. So this boss, as I explained earlier, is halfway through its HP, or well, not quite halfway. Once it reaches about 20,000 HP, it will then start absorbing all elemental attacks, and it can only be damaged by physical. So what that means is you only want to use physical attacks for the entire fight. Don't even bother trying to bring some magic damage healers. It's not worth it. So that being said, unless you want to bring like Marl, I suppose, because she could haste everybody, and that'd be cool, but she'd still be like single target healing everybody all the time. She has to. It's just awful. This boss hurts really, really bad. So anyways, one of the things that happens is early on the boss has a counter where it can absorb all your MP, and it can also use that as a regular attack, but later on it will start using Chaos Zone every single time you attack. Now this is important to realize, because if you just avoid attacking, you will avoid a lot of damage, because it feels like the boss is attacking like bam, 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 bam in quick succession. That's not actually what's happening. You are causing the attack. So if you're taking too much damage, just stop attacking for a little bit, heal up, assess the situation, decide what you want to do, and then you can press forward. Now, as you saw towards the end of that fight there too, I was using Ayla and Frog with Drop Down, which is a pretty expensive ability, but it hits really, really hard because I put the prismatic specs on them. So they were just demolishing the boss. They were doing like over 7,000 damage a hit with that, which is really, really good damage. The boss only has 32,000 HP, so you do that 4 or 5 times and it's just like, bam, so much of its health right there. The only other thing worth commenting on with this boss is that once it lowers its defenses and it starts like only being damaged with physical, is that it will begin storing damage, and it can release this with an attack that's called Phantasm that it will unleash every once in a while. However, the damage on that isn't that crazy. If you do just like damage it like nuts and you just really go all out for it, then it will do more damage when it finally unleashes. However, like worst case scenario, it does like 900 damage, which your characters are probably maxing out their HP right now, so you have more than that anyways. As long as so basically, as long as you're healing all the time, that doesn't matter either. So it's just another attack that I don't really think it's even worth worrying about. So anyways, just one other facet of this boss that's supposed to be a mechanic you're supposed to be worrying about, but it all boils down to the same thing. If you're taking too much damage, just slow down and focus on healing so you're not getting counterattacked, and then wait till you're full and then start up again, and that's all you really need to know. Even though this boss hurts really bad, it's honestly one of the simplest boss fights in the entire game. You're literally just using regular attacks and just healing, and that's it. Like, there's nothing to it, which is kind of sad. I find it a little bit sad. Like, on the one hand, it feels like this whole, like, all this extra content has a lot of depth, but at the same time, it's, like, super, super basic. And again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that they were addressing one of the power creep problems by making the regular attack stronger, because it was just falling further and further behind. So it's actually very clever that they did this, but I just still find this boss a little bit disappointing, because there's really only a couple characters you can even use for this battle. You can use, like, one weird strategy you can do is use Luca with a Spell Slinger and just have her only auto attack and nothing else. She'll probably hit for like 900 every single time. Not that that's all that much though. So as I've explained before, Chrono Cross has a very different timeline of events and stuff, and the way things are unfold in that game is very different, and so there's a lot of events that conflict with Chrono Trigger's timeline in general, as well as like the characters that are in it. So, for example, Magus was a character that the developers had this idea of, like, they thought it'd be really cool to have Magus be a playable character in Chrono Cross. They designed this one character who was robed and stuff to be similar to Magus. Their thought was that it could be like Magus, but he lost his memories, and then it'd be this big reveal and stuff like that. But then they ended up changing their mind, and they decided it wouldn't work for various reasons. But they had this big plan, the story arc for that character, that they never actually ended up pursuing. But they always kind of implied, like, well, you know, it could be Magus. We're not actually going to say that it is, but it could be him. And so now they release this remake of Chrono Trigger, and so they added this extra ending that tries to merge two of the histories together. And one of the things that happens in Chrono Cross is that Poor apparently becomes a nation or whatever, and then completely destroys Guardia. So that's one of the things that happens in that. So the ending that happens after this is they're showing that Magus loses his memories, implying that he becomes that character in Chrono Cross, which was never actually confirmed before this. And it doesn't really entirely make sense for Magus to be that character anymore. Like, again, it was their original plan, and then they went a completely different direction with it. And so now here they're retconning it again, and, like, trying to, like, forcefully, kind of sloppily make it happen. But the timeline of everything is all weird anyway and stuff, so that's why this ending is happening right here. It says that Guardia falls due to Poor Village, which is what was led by Dalton, or what he instigated anyways. And then it says the Masamune went missing. Now, the reason for this is because the Masamune is a key item that happens in Chrono Cross as well, and that's a whole story in and of itself, and the timeline of that is a little bit weird and doesn't make sense either. But that's an explanation of what's going on. Just know it's messed up. And this is like them trying to do something cool, and it kind of just ended up being weird. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, but is it canon? And the answer to that is, in another dimension? Yes. One of those. Go goody. So, for completing the game and getting the Times Eclipse ending, you then will win the Dream Seeker, which is the best sword in the entire game for Chrono. And the best use for this is to fight the Dream Devourer. Oh, wait, what? So save your game file, then fire it up, and you'll see that you're back in the end of time, or whatever you last used to Sparkly, and then you can go ahead and throw that puppy on Chrono, because it's the best item ever. Along those same lines, if you've been following along with me, we pretty much now have all of the best equipment in the entire game. So, that's all great. There's nothing really else to shoot for other than, like, maybe the new Arcana in the Arena of Ages. I never actually won that. It's such a rare chance for that to appear. But that's a super good item as well that makes it so that you have a chance on hit to reduce enemies' HP to 1, which, as you can imagine, is pretty overpowered for bosses. Otherwise, remaining things is like fighting Specchio's 6th and final form, which is available at level 99, which of course is going to take a while to get to that point. Now, the best way to level would be to probably go to Genodome, the conveyor belts at the very beginning, assuming you haven't completed Robo Side Quest. Otherwise, we no longer have access to that. Otherwise, like the Black Omen or like Dimensional Vortex would be the best places to get XP. Otherwise, kind of the only other thing is to go into New Game Plus, and one quick tip about that, by the way, is you don't take your gold with you. So I'd recommend you spend all your stuff right now either to purchase items you can sell once you get to New Game Plus, just so you have some gold, or buy all of the best consumables you can, because you can get a bunch of Mega Elixirs, especially if you completed the Lost Sanctum side quest. You can buy them from the new shop there. But yeah, going into New Game Plus, you'll keep all of your items and stuff, and you'll keep all your levels. You'll be super strong, but you will lose some of your key items. Like, for example, I think Shala's Amulet will go away because you get that along with Magus if you accept him into your party. So like items like that, for example, go away. One of the reasons for going into New Game Plus is because you can fill out your bestiary, so if you want to complete all your statuses and get all your entries, you can do that and hunt them all down. Now, otherwise, it's to get all of the endings, because if you fight Lavos at various points in the game through the story, then that will determine which ending you get in different credits. And some of them are based off of like whether or not you save Chrono, for example, so you'll get a different ending, different credits based on that. But yeah, that concludes Chrono Trigger for Nintendo DS. Such a good game, one of my favorites, yeah! So if you have similar sentiments, you should check out some of my other playlists, because if we have similar tastes, chances are I have some other playlists that you might find tasty as well. But yeah, I'll always be posting walkthroughs, guides, and Let's Plays here on YouTube, but in addition to that, I'm also live streaming on Twitch throughout the week too, and so you can come out and check me out there where I'm playing random games like this, but also, I'd like to practice through games before I actually start recording and stuff, so I'll take notes and such, and I've been streaming while I've been doing that. Lately, I actually have been recording some of the gameplay live as well, and it's been kind of a fun experience because I'll be like, oh, does this boss have any other strategies or whatever, and then people in chat are like, contributing and giving me ideas and stuff. I'll be like, oh, I hadn't considered that. You're so right, you know, but it's been kind of fun. I've been doing that a lot for Breath of the Wild lately, and that's been kind of a fun thing. I have all this big list of names to credit at the end of the videos, you know, but it's been a fun time. I've been really enjoying it. It's like a different way. I've always done this solo, you know, with walkthrough stuff, but it's been kind of fun doing it as more of a community thing. Yup, that's the end of the game as well as this walkthrough. So thank you guys so much for watching. You have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.